Hi, this is Polka Dot Lady. I just wanted to share with you some of the thoughts I have on pre-tribulation rapture. I went to a church when I was growing up that was pre-trib. I went to a Bible college that was pre-trib. But later in my life, I started reading through the Bible, and I was like, wait, that sounds like not very pre-tribby, you know? And I got a little concerned because it really does matter, right? If we're pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib, whatever, these things matter. Because if we're going to be mid-trib or post-trib, we better be preppers extreme and buy a piece of property that we can survive on with, a bunker and 20 years of food or whatever. So it matters. And it also matters with our hope. Like, what do we have to suffer? Do we have to get our heads cut off? Do we have to go through all these things? So it was important to me to try and figure out, for real, legit, are we pre-trib or are we not? And so I started studying really deeply. And I tend to study in the Greek just because Bible college and all, that's my go-to. And I tend to not trust other people. I know that's awful, but in the age we live in, I've just seen and met too many people that I don't really trust them. So I decided that I was going to dig in, and I just started praying about it. And I'm like, Lord, just guide me, direct me. And it's taken a long time for me to come to the conclusions I've come to. Now, this little video, I just want to do a quick little video on the history of the pre-trib rapture, just so we can clarify, what the facts of the case are. And there's so much more out there on the history of the rapture in the church. I just was trying to condense this into a very digestible, piece that's, under 15 minutes. So I hope this encourages you, and I hope you have a great day.
A red herring I often hear about the pre-tribulation rapture is that it was started by a man named John Darby in the 1800s. Well, that simply isn't true. And I would like to give you a little mini Christian history lesson so that we can maybe get more Christians all on the same page. Now, no one would dispute that Jesus directly taught all the 12 of his disciples, and that John was a disciple of Jesus. I think it's widely accepted that the Apostle Paul knew the apostles of Jesus, and that he would have been able to have direct training from them on things that had nothing to do with Jewish law. So we can accept him as a traditional apostle, and he's definitely pre-trib if you read the Greek version of his writings. Now, John wrote the book of Revelation around 90 AD, so around 60 years after Christ was resurrected. John's first apostle was named Polycarp. Polycarp was the bishop of Smyrna, the church in Revelation known for being persecuted. Polycarp had a student named Irenaeus, who not only studied faithfully under Polycarp, but was the bishop at Lyons, another persecuted church. Now, John and Polycarp fall under what we would call the fathers of the Christian church. John had direct knowledge from Jesus Christ of things that were never written in the Bible, since John 21:25 tells us that, and there are also many other things that Jesus did, which if they were written one by one, I suppose that not even the world itself could contain the books that would be written. So not everything said was written. So we can rightly assume that John had full knowledge of things that were not written in the Gospels, and that whom he directly taught would also be given all of the important and needful information that was not written in the Bible, like the things that were spoken in person, or that things that would not need to be put into a follow-up letter, which is much of what the New Testament is. The apostles would go, they would talk to a group of people, convert a bunch of people, start a church, and then they would send a follow-up letter. So we have to play sleuth when we read the New Testament. Now, Polycarp trained Irenaeus, who was quite a theologian. Irenaeus wrote a book called Against Heresies around the year 175 AD. I bought this book and I read it. It had super interesting things in it, like explaining what the doctrine of Balaam was, or what the doctrine of the Nicolaitans was, or what heresies were in the early church, and what biblical arguments he had against them, and why they indeed were heretical. He also addressed the pre-tribulation rapture of the church. He addressed it as if everyone clearly knew that this was the expectation. He addressed the rapture as the sudden removal of the church just before terrible destructions would fall upon the entire earth. He also said that Satan had around 6,000 years from the time that he tempted Adam and Eve in the garden to rule the earth before Christ would come and war with him and win, and then Christ would have the last 1,000 years to reign on earth. Another early church bishop was Cyprian, who was the bishop of Carthage from 200 to 258 AD, and then he was martyred by beheading by the Roman authorities. He held fast to his faith for sure. Now, he also wrote about the rapture. He said that some terrible things will occur, and it would be evident to the church at the end times that the end times are imminent, like a ship heading for a shipwreck. But the joy we have as Christians is knowing that we will be rescued and removed prior to the devastating global judgments. Rather, we would be snatched from this world to our personal abodes in heaven with Christ, so that we can be restored to paradise and live in God's kingdom. You might be wondering, with these leaders in the church in the early days, how did this not pre-tribulation rapture become a thing? Well, in 274 AD, the Roman emperor made the sun worship the official religion, Sol Invictus in Latin, or Sun the Invincible in English. And he forced everyone to worship the sun god Apollo, pure paganism. The Roman Church in Rome was having some serious trouble bringing pagans into their Christian worship services, since Christianity was illegal, and not many people wanted to sign up for persecution, which at that time was to either be fed to the lions, soaked with wax and then affixed to a tree and burnt, or to be boiled in oil or beheaded. The Roman Church felt that they needed to find ways to draw the culture around them into the church, and they did the unthinkable. They went all seeker-friendly. Sound familiar? Anyway, and they brought elements of paganism into the church to make the masses of people more comfortable. And they rebranded Ishtar and Tammuz into being Mary and Jesus. So basically, they diluted and then eventually flipped the entire religion back to paganism. But then they always had that little twist of Christianity. A very satanic tactic. It looks pretty much like the truth, but not 100% the truth. We see a lot of that today in the very liberal churches. This is when the pre-tribulation rapture was flushed right out of the church doctrine the first time. Now, the Roman Catholics have never accepted a pre-tribulation rapture or a rapture of any type. Now, in the process of rebranding Christianity into catechism, a lot of changes were made that were fundamental to the Christian religion and changing it away. Some of the big items that the Catholic Church changed include communion, how it's done, what it means, the way and purpose of baptism, the understanding of fellowship, service, why you would have fellowship with Christ, the method to get your sins forgiven, the method to Christ himself, how it is you're considered saved or not. Very fundamental issues that separate the Catholics from the Christians. And they also flipped grace alone doctrine to a works-based doctrine. This is to be expected because paganism is 100% works-based. When Constantine was ruling around 337 to 357 AD, he finally made it legal to be a Christian in Rome and illegal to persecute Christians, practice divination, or make sacrifices to idols. But by the end of his life, he outlawed paganism altogether. Although he himself was a mutt, if you want to call it that, being partially Christian, partially pagan in beliefs, it is said that before he died, he did have a full conversion and he was baptized into Christ prior to dying. In 338, Ephraim the Syrian, the bishop of Nisibis, although he was made a saint in the Catholic Church, he was never a Catholic at any point. They just kind of adopted him. Anyway, he didn't even live in the Roman Empire until just before his death. Ephraim also wrote about a pre-tribulation rapture. He said indisputably that all believers in Jesus are taken up to heaven to spare them from seeing the evils that will come upon this earth. This author also was very emphatic that the day of the Lord in the Old Testament and the Great Tribulation are indeed the same event, and he encouraged his readers back then that all the world would be evil around them, and that barbarians and wars and famines had come and gone, and that would still be the case until the Great Tribulation. And that as believers in Jesus, we should not have fear or be concerned about the events to come, knowing full well that they were never intended for us, and that we would be removed from the earth prior to any of them occurring. In the 400s, we hit the Dark Ages, and in the Dark Ages, there were a lot of crusades happening between different factions and religions, and it was kind of like playing real-life Survivor, so not a lot of writing is done on all these topics. I'm sure there was a lot of oral teaching happening, but there's not a whole lot of documentation on how specific branches of Christianity were thinking about rapture. It disappears in history until around John Darby, around 1800. Now, Darby was originally an Anglican, but he became to believe that the church should be based on the Bible alone and not have all of the traditions that had branched off of catechism or paganism. Now, Anglicans have some of the Catholic traditions with a little twist. He converted many Catholics into Christianity, even though I would not agree with Darby's theology. He was wise enough to understand that the Catholics were not Christians, and that the church should be based on the Bible alone, and he was also a powerful teacher of the rapture. Perhaps you can see on this really very quick overview of Christian history why I think saying John Darby is the source of the pre-tribulation rapture is a red herring. I don't have any poor feelings toward anyone that has a different belief than I do. I just think that it's not historically accurate. What I do know is that men who do their best and often do not agree with the pre-tribulation rapture. They dig and they dig and they dig into the scriptures, and time and again they come up with a pre-tribulation rapture thinking. There are several branches of this Christian family tree, and they will all argue until they're blue in the face that pre-tribulation is a fantasy, or that pre-tribulation is the only way. It just isn't worth the argument, you guys. If people are truly saved, they're going to go in the rapture, regardless of its date. Remember, Thessalonians, the dead first, and then those alive at his coming. The most obvious truth is that we need to follow God and the Bible and not men. Men are always making mistakes, myself included. The Bible is infallible and the resource we should be running to. And for interpretation, we need to ask and pray and say, Lord, please help me understand this. He will give it to you. Now, this video has really only been on the basic history of the pre-tribulation doctrine. But if you are unsure for yourself if the pre-tribulation rapture is real, please consider watching one of my word nerd videos regarding the Antichrist being revealed and regarding the day of Christ and the day of the Lord. They're two short videos that you could easily see that would be digestible very quickly without having to do as much study as a lot of us have done to get to this point.